She was about to fall asleep on the couch when the phone rang. It was past midnight, and she had just finished a long shift at the diner. She groaned and reached for the cordless phone on the coffee table. "Hello," she said, rubbing her eyes. There was no answer, only a deep, unsettling silence. She frowned and checked the caller ID. It was blocked. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice quivering slightly. Still, there was no response, just an eerie static noise. She hummed up and tossed the phone back on the table, feeling a growing unease in the pit of her stomach. She couldn't shake off the chilling sensation that something was terribly wrong. She closed her eyes and tried to ignore her rising fear. But then the phone rang again. Her heart skipped a beat, and a shiver ran down her spine. She opened her eyes and glared at the phone, dreading the thought of answering it. However, her curiosity and mounting anxiety got the better of her. With trembling hands, she picked it up and pressed the talk button. "Listen, you sicko. If you don't stop this right now, I swear I'll..." Before she could finish her threat, she was interrupted by a low, sinister chuckle. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. This wasn't a prank call anymore. This was something far more sinister. "What do you want?" she managed to utter, her voice barely audible. The breathing on the other end became heavier, louder, and filled with malice. "I can see you," a chilling voice whispered. "I know what you're wearing. I know where you live. You can't hide from me." A cold sweat broke out on her forehead. She glanced nervously around the room, feeling a sudden vulnerability in her own home. Every shadow seemed to come alive with lurking danger. Summoning her courage, she mustered a shaky voice. "Who are you? Why are you doing this?" But the only response she received was a sinister, bone-chilling laugh that echoed through the receiver, seeping deep into her soul. Terrified, she dropped the phone and rushed to the window, her heart pounding in her chest. She desperately pulled the curtains shut, as if shutting out the unseen presence that threatened her sanity. Frantically, she dialed 911, her voice trembling as she recounted the events to the operator. The seconds felt like hours as she waited for help to arrive, her ears hyper-aware of every creak and whisper in her apartment. Finally, she heard a knock on the door. Her body tensed, and her breath caught in her throat. Was it the police, or was it the tormentor at her doorstep? "Who is it?" she whispered, her voice filled with apprehension. "It's me, Mike," a voice replied from the other side. "Something's not right. I heard your scream. Are you okay?" Relief washed over her like a balm. Mike was her neighbor, a dependable presence in her life. But even with his familiar voice, a lingering doubt remained. Could she truly trust anyone? She cautiously opened the door, peering into the dimly lit hallway. Mike stood there, his features distorted by the shadows. In his hand, a flashlight illuminated his concerned face. "I'm here, Lisa. What's happening?" he asked, his voice full of genuine concern. She rushed into his arms, trembling and on the verge of tears. "There's someone. They've been calling me, watching me. They know things, personal things." Mike's expression hardened, and he entered her apartment with determination. "Stay behind me, Lisa. I won't let anyone harm you." As he searched the apartment, the tension in the air thickened, each room becoming a potential hiding place for the deranged stalker. Lisa's pulse raced, her senses heightened to an almost painful level. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of a shadow, felt like a malicious presence closing in. But to her astonishment, Mike found no trace of an intruder. The emptiness of the apartment only deepened her sense of dread. Was this all in her mind, or was the stalker cunningly evading detection? As Mike returned to her side, she looked up at him, her eyes pleading for answers and reassurance. His face seemed sincere, yet a flicker of something darker passed through his gaze. "Don't worry, Lisa," he whispered, his voice laced with an unsettling mix of sympathy and malevolence. "You're safe now. No one can harm you." Her fear renewed. Lisa took a step back, her mind racing with suspicion. She clutched the phone tightly, ready to call for help again. But before she could react, Mike's smile vanished, and his expression contorted into a twisted grin. Revealing his true intentions, he held up the cell phone and pressed a button. In a bone-chilling whisper, he uttered words that froze Lisa's blood. "I can see you." In the rotting heart of a once bustling city, cloaked by the grim pallor of permanent dust, stood Street Morgana's hospital, a fortress of suffering. The structure sprawled over several city blocks, windows like vacuous eyes gaping into the abyss of eternal night. I found myself trapped in this behemoth, a patient, not by choice but by cruel circumstance, not remembering how or why I ended up here, just a vague awareness of a lurching ambulance ride, of masked figures moving in blurry synchrony, of screams that seemed to echo from the core of my own mind. Then abrupt silence, punctuated by the sporadic hum of dim, dying fluorescent lights. Days blended into nights, and the nights into nightmares, a ceaseless, undulating pattern of existence. Time had a way of distorting itself here, perhaps as some unspeakable cosmic joke. I was confined to my bed in a ward that was eternally shrouded in sterile half-light. Around me, the ward harbored an insidious tableau of shadow-shrouded figures who appeared to be other patients, each lost in their world of pain and silence, their features a canvas for dread and despair. Our ward was under the constant vigil of the nurses, spectral figures wrapped in once white uniforms, now stained with unknown horrors. Their faces were obscured beneath layers of masks and visors, eyes hidden behind tinted glasses. They moved with a mechanical precision, tending to us with hands as cold as the city's rain-slicked streets. They rarely spoke, except in hushed, garbled whispers that scratched at the edge of audibility. In the silence of the ward, interrupted only by the occasional groan of agony or the soft, wet coughs, the air became thick with the dread of the unknown, of death, and even worse, what lay beyond. A miasma of despair that tasted bitter on the tongue, almost corrupt. I heard whispers among the spectral nurses, a dread-filled word that I couldn't fully grasp, a word that sent shivers down my spine. Beyond the quarantine, the city seemed to be rotting away, collapsing under an invisible, insidious plague. The nurses never confirmed it, their cryptic silence doing more harm than any spoken word. They were our sole connection to the world outside. Yet they brought no news, no comfort, only a creeping sense of doom. I began to notice changes, aberrations in the hospital's reality. The coughing patients around me seemed to be caught in an endless loop of suffering, their pallid skin slowly peeling, revealing grotesque, blackened sores underneath. Their eyes, clouded and distant, flickered with an unholy light, the echo of an existence that was neither living nor dead. The nurses began to change too. Their precision slipped into erratic behavior. Their whispers grew more frantic, their movements more hurried. I noticed with a thrill of horror that they too bore the same blackened sores subtly hidden beneath their uniforms. One night, in the throes of a feverish stupor, I found myself staring into a reflective surface, the glass window of a passing medical cart. The face that stared back was not mine. It was an unrecognizable, decomposing shell of a person, eyes burning with that same unholy light. A gasp choked in my throat. I too was part of this grotesque tableau. Suddenly, everything fell into place, a terrifying puzzle, each piece more horrifying than the last. The coughing, the sores, the city's decay, our hospital quarantine, the nurses' frantic behavior, their whispers. It was a plague, a disease of undeath, of endless suffering, a reality worse. It was at the edge of twilight on an ordinary Tuesday evening that Sarah Collins found herself standing at the foreboding entrance of the long-abandoned Holworth factory. A sturdy woman of 35, Sarah had made a living out of salvaging rare parts from forgotten machines. An order had come in for components found only within the machinery at Holworth, coaxing her into the rusting skeleton of the industrial district. The factory, an industrial leviathan of brick and steel, was an eerie sight. It stood as a ghostly monument to a bygone era, casting long shadows that devoured the faint evening light. Its skeletal remains, under the pale wash of twilight, bore an uncanny resemblance to a desolate haunted house from an old horror movie. With a resolute deep breath, Sarah pushed the creaking factory door and stepped into the gloom. The air inside was heavy and stagnant, tainted with the musty smell of decay and wet rust. The deeply quiet within was only broken by the distant drip of leaking water and the soft scuttle of rats. Her flashlight carved a narrow path through the inky blackness, the narrow beam casting grotesque shadows on the machinery that lay silent and forgotten. As she ventured deeper into the heart of the factory, she discovered an old office, a decaying time capsule in the sea of darkness. Amidst dusty papers and antiquated equipment, a rusted safe sat stubbornly in the corner. It seemed oddly out of place, a silent sentinel holding on to secrets of a time long forgotten. Intrigued, Sarah made a mental note to return with tools from her shop to explore the safe's contents. Just as she was about to leave, the sound of coarse, hushed voices echoed from below. She followed the sound and found herself peering through a cracked floorboard. Below, in the factory's underbelly, a ruthless gang of criminals was plotting. Their faces, scarred by violence and hardship, were lit by the dim glow of a solitary lamp. Sarah felt a chill creep up her spine as she overheard their conversation. They were orchestrating a series of high-stakes robberies across the city, planning to use the factory as a base. The very thought sent a wave of dread washing over her. She realized that she was trapped in a spider web of criminal conspiracy in the bowels of an industrial mausoleum. She needed to escape and alert the authorities, but the factory was a labyrinthine nightmare of corroding machinery and shadowed corners. With each step, the creaking metal and the groaning floors seemed poised to betray her presence. As she navigated through the factory, every rustle and scrape was a specter of imminent danger. In her desperate flight, she stumbled upon an old maintenance phone, miraculously functional despite the decades of neglect. With trembling hands, she dialed 911, her voice barely above a whisper as she relayed the gang's chilling plot. As she hung up, her heart hammered in her chest. She heard the distant echo of footsteps growing louder. They were coming. Sarah bolted, her heart pounding in her ears like a frenzied drumbeat. She could hear the criminals closing in, their shouts echoing in the desolate expanse of the factory. Each thunderous footfall felt like a hunting drum, growing louder and more terrifying with every passing second. She dashed towards the main entrance, her adrenaline-fueled run turning into a desperate sprint. Just as she felt her strength give out, the factory was suddenly flooded with the harsh blare of sirens and the stark flash of red and blue lights. Police swarmed the factory, their sudden arrival disrupting the grim chase. Sarah was quickly taken to safety as the gang was apprehended. Her terrifying ordeal had not only prevented a citywide crime spree, but also unmasked the criminal underbelly lurking within the city's industrial ghost. However, despite emerging as an unsung hero, the terrifying events of that night left a permanent scar. The once forgotten Holworth factory had become a symbol of hidden terrors, a grim reminder of the darkness that could fester within the decaying bones of the city's past.